I did not pack in a hurry. That's the part people never understand. They expect you to be frantic, shaking, maybe crying into a suitcase while your hands won't cooperate. But I moved slowly and deliberately, the way I used to grade papers at the end of a long semester, one item at a time, nothing rushed, nothing forgotten. The blue cardigan first, then the photograph of my mother from 1971, the one where she's standing in front of the house on Claiborne Avenue with her arms crossed like she owned the whole street. Then my insulin kit, my blood pressure log, my reading glasses. I didn't take the quilt my daughter-in-law had given me 2 Christmases ago. I left it folded at the foot of the guest bed, which is what the room had always been, even after I'd lived in it for 11 months. A guest room. I just hadn't understood that until the night before. Let me go back. My name is Vivian and I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years teaching 8th grade English in the Jefferson Parish School District outside New Orleans, and I retired in 2019 with a pension that most people would call modest, and I called enough. Enough for the condo I owned outright on Lake Avenue. Enough for the twice-yearly trips to visit my sister in Baton Rouge. Enough for the life I had built quietly and without fanfare after my husband passed in 2017. Gerald and I had one son. His name is Scott, and he is 41 years old, and until about 14 months ago, I would have described him as a good man who loved his mother. I'm not sure what I would call him now. I'm still working through the vocabulary. Scott married a woman named Kristen 12 years ago. She is energetic and decisive, and keeps an immaculate house in Metairie. And in the early years, I made a sincere effort to understand her, because Scott loved her and because I believe that the women who raise our grandchildren deserve our patience. We were never close. But we were polite. We managed holidays without incident. We texted occasionally. I thought that was enough. When Gerald died, Scott called every Sunday for about 4 months. Then the calls became every other Sunday. Then they became occasional. I didn't fault him for it. Grief makes people uncomfortable, and Scott had always pulled back from things that made him uncomfortable. I'd noticed that about him since he was a teenager. He preferred situations where he already knew the outcome. In the spring of 2022, Scott called on a Tuesday, which was unusual. He said he and Kristen had been talking. He said they had plenty of room, which was true. They had a 4-bedroom house, and 2 children who were 7 and 9 at the time. He said they worried about me being alone. He said this guest suite was sitting empty. He said, "Mom, it doesn't make sense for you to be over there rattling around by yourself when we have all this space." I told him I appreciated it, but I was fine. He called again the following Tuesday and the one after that. On the 4th call, Kristen got on the phone. She said the kids missed me. She said it would mean so much to them to have me close. She said, "You could help with school pickup some days, just when things get crazy. Just occasionally, nothing formal." I want to be honest about this part. I was lonely, 2 years out from losing Gerald, and the condo that had once felt cozy had started to feel like a held breath. I missed having people move through rooms. I missed the sounds of a household. I missed being needed in small ways. So I said yes. I listed the condo with a rental agent in August and moved into their guest suite in September. I brought what fit. I put the rest in storage. I told myself it was temporary, just to see how it went. But in the quiet part of my mind, I think I already knew I was hoping it would become permanent. The first month was fine. The children were happy to see me in the mornings. I helped with homework and made red beans on Mondays the way my mother had. Scott seemed lighter. Kristen was busy with her marketing job and her book club and her spin class schedule, but she was pleasant enough. I told my sister everything was working out. Then October came, and things began to shift in ways that were small enough to ignore individually, but large enough to notice together. Kristen started scheduling things on weekday evenings without telling me. Not asks, scheduling. I would come downstairs at 5:15 to start something for dinner and realize that she had left at 4, that Scott would be home at 7, and that 2 children needed to be fed, bathed, and put to bed in the hours between. I did it. Of course I did it. They were my grandchildren and I loved them. But it became the pattern, not the exception. By November, I was doing the full school pickup run 3 days a week. I was packing the lunches most mornings. I was the one who took my granddaughter to her Wednesday afternoon dance class and sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes, with the other mothers who were 20 years younger than me and very friendly in the way that people are friendly when they don't intend to remember your name. I watched all of it. I watched the way I had always watched, carefully without comment, storing things away the way a teacher learns to read a classroom before saying a word. What I noticed was this. Kristen was not unkind to me directly. She thanked me for things. She occasionally brought me coffee in the morning. But there was a quality to how she moved through that house, through her own house, which I understood and respected. That made clear I was a resource she was drawing from, not a person she was drawing toward. I told myself I was being ungenerous. I told myself she was busy and tired, and that many people in their late 30s with 2 children and a full-time job were running on empty. I told myself that Scott loved me, and that was what mattered. In January, I had a routine appointment with my endocrinologist. She had been monitoring a nodule on my thyroid for about 2 years. Watching it, she always said, just watching. At the January appointment, she referred me to a specialist at Tulane Medical Center. The specialist ordered a biopsy in early February. On the 14th of February, I have always found it somewhat absurd that it happened on Valentine's Day, as if the universe had a sense of irony. I got the results. Thyroid cancer. Papillary, which is the most common and most treatable type, but cancer nonetheless, a word that lands in your body differently than you expect, even when you thought you were prepared for it. I drove home from that appointment alone. I had told no one I was going, because I hadn't wanted to make it into something before I knew what it was. I sat in my car, in Scott and Kristen's driveway for about 12 minutes. I did not cry. I thought about my mother who had survived a stroke at 64 and lived to 81. I thought about my students, all those children I had watched grow up and move through the world. I thought about the magnolia tree at the edge of the yard that had been blooming unseasonal and extravagant all week, like it didn't know it was still winter. Then I went inside and told my son. We were at the kitchen table. He had a glass of water in front of him, and he turned it once, slowly, while I talked. His face did the thing it does when he is processing something he doesn't want to be real. The jaw tightens. The eyes go to the middle distance. He said, okay. He said, what does that mean exactly? He said, what do the doctors say? I told him what the doctors said. I told him the survival rates were excellent, that the treatment plan was surgery and possibly a round of radioactive iodine, that my prognosis was genuinely good. I told him I was going to be fine. He got up and hugged me. I held on to that hug for a few extra seconds. I needed it. That night, after the children were in bed, I was reading in the guest room, the door not fully closed, the way I had started leaving it because the house felt less quiet that way, and I heard them in the hallway, Scott and Kristen, not arguing, not quite, but their voices had that particular compression that voices get when people are having a conversation they have already half decided on. I heard Kristen say, I can't do this, you know I can't do this. I work 40 hours a week and I am not a caregiver. I never signed up to be a caregiver. I heard Scott say something low that I couldn't make out. Kristen said if she needs real help, real medical help, there are facilities. There are options. You can't expect me to turn this house into a hospice. Hospice. She said that word about my thyroid cancer, which had not even been staged yet, which my doctor had described as highly manageable. Hospice. Scott said something again, quieter. Kristen said, I love you and I am telling you, as your wife, she is not my responsibility. I have 2 children to raise. I cannot be worried about your mother on top of everything else. If she's sick, she needs to make other arrangements. And Scott said, okay, just that, okay. I closed my book. I did not get up. I did not open the door or say anything through it. I sat in the guest room that had always been a guest room and I listened to their footsteps move down the hallway and I thought, there it is. There is the thing I had been watching for and hoping I was wrong about. I did not sleep much that night, but I did not cry either. In the morning, after Scott left for work and Kristen left for work, and the children were at school, I called my attorney. His name is Mr. Fontenot, old school New Orleans family. We had gone to the same church for 20 years, and he had handled Gerald's estate and several other things for me over the years. I told him I needed to review some paperwork. I told him I had a few questions about a personal property arrangement. I asked if he could see me that afternoon. He said, of course. Now I should tell you something that I had not shared with Scott and Kristen. Not because I was hiding it, but because it was simply not something that had come up. When Gerald died, He left me more than I expected. Gerald had been careful his whole life. Not wealthy by anyone's outside measure, but careful. He had a life insurance policy that I knew about. He also had a small investment account that had grown over the years, and a property in Hammond that his mother had left him, which we'd had rented out for nearly 2 decades without ever deciding what to do with it. I sold the Hammond property in 2021. With the sale, the life insurance, and the investments, Gerald left me with just under $2.3 million. It sat in accounts I managed conservatively and quietly, and I told almost no one about it because Gerald had taught me that you don't announce money. You just have it, or you don't. There was one other thing. When Scott and Kristen bought their house in Metairie in 2018, they had been $75,000 short of the down payment. Gerald and I gave them the money. As a gift, we said, because you don't want your children starting out under that kind of weight. But Gerald, who was careful about everything, had also drawn up a simple personal note for our own records, signed by Scott, acknowledging the amount. Not something we ever intended to enforce. Just something Gerald believed in. Putting things on paper. I found that note in Gerald's files in 2021. I had put it in my own files and not thought much about it since. Mr. Fontenot had helped draw up the note. He remembered it. I want to be clear about something. When I walked into Mr. Fontenot's office that afternoon, I had not decided anything yet. I was not plotting. I was a 67-year-old woman with a cancer diagnosis and a guest room that had just been described as a liability, and I needed to understand what my options were. Mr. Fontenot laid them out. The note, he said, was technically enforceable, though I had never indicated any intention of enforcement, and Scott had no reason to believe otherwise. The rental income from the condo on Lake Avenue, I had kept it rented, rather than selling, was currently generating $1,650 a month. My pension, Social Security, and the interest on my accounts gave me more than enough to live independently. I did not need to be in Scott's house. I had simply chosen to be there. I could unchoose. I drove back to the house. I made dinner. I helped my grandchildren with homework. I watched television with Scott while Kristen was on a call, and he rubbed my shoulder at one point the way he had when he was a teenager and wanted me to know he was sorry about something without having to say it. I thought about what he had said. Okay. I thought about Kristen's word, hospice. I thought about what it means to love someone, a child, a spouse, a mother, and whether love that disappears at the first mention of inconvenience was ever really love at all, or whether it was just comfort wearing love's clothes. On Friday morning, I got up early. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with the light coming in from the east, the way it does in Louisiana in February, thin and slanted and surprisingly gentle. I began to arrange things. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved quietly. I called the rental agency about my condo. My tenant had been considering leaving anyway, and she confirmed she would be out by the end of March. I spoke with Mr. Fontenot twice more. I had a thorough consultation with my oncologist and scheduled the surgical date. I arranged for my sister to come stay with me afterward. I did not tell Scott any of this. He checked in on me twice that week. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Let me know if you want me to come to any appointments. I told him I was fine, that I had it handled. He seemed relieved to hear it. On the last Saturday of February, I packed, not in a hurry, deliberately, one item at a time. I left the quilt Kristen had given me. I left the throw pillow and the decorative tray and the small succulent plant she had placed on the dresser to make the room feel welcoming. I left all the furniture because none of it was mine. I took my mother's photograph, my blue cardigan, my books. I called a car and I rode to my sister's house in Baton Rouge, where I would stay until the condo was ready. And before I left, I set a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter addressed to Scott. Inside was a copy of the personal note for $75,000 and a letter from Mr. Fontenot, written professionally and without malice, noting that the note had matured and inquiring about repayment terms. Also inside was a handwritten note from me. It said only this: I heard you say okay. I need you to understand what that cost. I love you and I will call you from Baton Rouge. Mom, I did not wait for his response. I got in the car. I had the surgery in mid-March at Tulane. My sister was there. The surgeon removed the nodule and a portion of the thyroid, and the pathology confirmed clean margins. I did a short course of radioactive iodine in April, which meant 2 days in isolation in a hotel room that the hospital kept for that purpose, and My sister left me a bag of snacks outside the door every morning and texted me until I fell asleep. I moved back into the condo in late April. I had it repainted. I bought a new couch. I hung my mother's photograph in the hallway where I could see it every time I came through the front door. Scott called me 12 times in the first 2 weeks after I left. I answered on the fourth call. When I was ready, he cried. I had not expected that. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what had come over him, that he hadn't been thinking, that he had been caught off guard and said the wrong thing. He said Kristen was not a bad person. He said he knew that wasn't an excuse. I said, I know you love me, Scott. But I also know what I heard. And I need you to sit with that for a while before we decide what comes next. He asked about the note, about the $75,000. I told him we weren't there yet. I told him to give me some time. In May, Scott asked if he could come see me in New Orleans. He came alone. We sat on my porch with coffee and he was quieter than I'd seen him in years. The kind of quiet that means someone has been doing some real thinking. He told me that he and Kristen had started seeing a marriage counselor. He told me that he had said some things to Kristen that needed to be said, and that she had said some things back, and that they were working through it. He said he understood, now, that what he had said in that hallway was not a small thing. That telling someone okay while they discussed removing his mother from her home because cancer was inconvenient was not something a grown man should be able to live with easily. I told him I appreciated that. I told him that I was not interested in punishing anyone, that I was 67 years old and I had thyroid cancer and a clean prognosis and a condo with fresh paint and a pension and more in savings than I had ever told him about, and that I had more life left to live than he apparently understood. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "How much is more?" I told him. The expression on his face was something I will carry with me for a long time. Not the surprise exactly, though there was plenty of that. More the recalibration. You could see him rearranging the shape of things, realizing that the woman he had allowed to be discussed as a liability was not a woman who needed rescuing. She had never needed rescuing. She had chosen, for a season, to be near her family. And the family had made their priorities clear. I told Scott that Mr. Fontenot would reach out about the note, not to create hardship, but because Gerald had believed in paper and I believed in honoring Gerald. I told him we could work out terms that made sense. I told him that for Christmas this year, I would like to see the grandchildren, and that I would like him to make sure that happened. He nodded. He asked if I thought things could ever go back to the way they were. I told him I didn't think the goal was going back. I thought the goal was going forward, honestly, with everyone understanding who everyone actually was. Before he left, he stood on my porch for a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the street. The magnolia tree at the edge of my neighbor's yard was blooming again, the way it does every spring in New Orleans, extravagant, without apology, as if it simply cannot help itself. He said, "I'm glad you're okay, Mom. I mean it," I said. "I know you do, Scott." And I went back inside and closed the door softly behind me. And I stood in my own hallway with my mother's photograph on the wall and the smell of the coffee still warm in the kitchen. And I thought about how much room a person can take up in a life when nobody told her to make herself small. The condo does not feel like a held breath anymore. It feels like mine.